pollutant is any substance that has harmful or poisonous effects. We usually think of pollutants as being chemicals like DDT that are both harmful and poisonous. CO2 is a naturally occurring gas. It is not a poison. However, we have overwhelming evidence that CO2 is harmful. It is heating the earth, acidifying the oceans, and raising sea levels. These effects will displace millions of people, disrupt global ecosystems, and threaten our food supply.
That is from a video from something called UQX Denial 101. And the speaker is Sarah Green, a professor of, I need a drum roll here, chemistry. A professor of chemistry, Michigan Technological University. A professor of chemistry, Michigan Technological University has condemned carbon dioxide. Well, we're back on our regular topic of experts, their nature, and particularly their limitations, of which, of course, they believe they themselves have none. As we're going to see in this example of the EPA and when it required carbon dioxide be labeled a pollutant. There was a fascinating exchange on the principle of what we might call experts deciding all things and, well, really subsidiarity. From the Manhattan Contrarian, who is Francis Menton. It's a very good blog. I have a link on my blog. You should go and look at this. Now, he was at a conference. I think it was the Federalist Society. I can't remember, but he was at a conference at which they were debating, quote, the merits of recent Supreme Court cases that have articulated something called the Major Questions Doctrine as a limit on administrative agency power to promulgate regulations and sweeping import without clear statutory basis, end quote. Now, sounds like a very useful thing to do, particularly in the plague of experts that besets us. Now, there was an academic lawyer named Sally Katzen. I guess she was the only one on her side there, so you got to give her kudos for sticking up for her crazy ideas, but she defended the side of experts in the EPA. Now, we have to remember, like I said, the EPA, a while ago now, I've forgotten how many years, decided that your breath was a pollutant. Yes, they did. Carbon dioxide, the very stuff of your breath, the very food of plants, is, experts at EPA insist, a pollutant. And they were set to shut down all coal and gas because of this expert ruling. Well, blinded as they were by climate change ideology. And they obviously have forgotten that carbon dioxide is food for plants, which I can't help repeating because they can't help but forget that. No carbon dioxide, no plants. No plants, no people. No people, no experts even. How they came to class photosynthesis as a pollution or something is something only we could mark down to the hubris of experts. Anyway, obviously it was in part some of them must have remembered photosynthesis from their high school or middle school days, one hopes. So it was obviously a legal maneuver, a trick, a lie. It's a bold-faced lie in order to get control of something they knew they couldn't otherwise get control of. So it was just a despicable move, but not obviously under what an experts might do. Now, you might recall SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, did stop the EPA's efforts along these lines. Barely. All the left part of the court voted as they always do. We don't even have to think about it. Whenever there's a question coming up in which there's any possibility of a left-right distinction, the left part of the court will always rule for the left. So there's no point even looking at their arguments on them. But the right, of course, the so-called right, doesn't always vote as they're expected to. Anyway, this Katzen commented on the ruling. Now, this is, again, quoting Menton. Ms. Katzen, her voice dripping with scorn, The Supreme Court has decreed that only the dysfunctional Congress can address the most critical issues facing us. She was particularly critical of the court having struck down the Clean Power Plan, which in her view was well within the authority granted to the EPA under the CAA, as well as being a subject that could only properly be dealt with by people with the necessary expertise, such as the bureaucrats at EPA, end quote. Well, that was they claimed they had the power under the Clean Power Plan. That's how they labeled, I guess they labeled carbon dioxide a pollutant independently of that, or in conjunction with this ruling in some technical legal way, which escapes me, or I never really paid attention to, because it was obviously a farce. Luckily, people like Menton do pay attention to this kind of stuff. But the interesting point, the more interesting point is how much can they get away with? They've already declared photosynthesis a pollution, the key constituent besides sunlight and water of photosynthesis, a pollutant. I don't know what else they could possibly get away with. So Menton asked the very obvious question: what limiting principle, if any, constrains the EPA? Or is it as it seems that the EPA can do anything it wants, if what it wants is defined by them as their expertise, under the purview of their expertise? Katzen, quote, couldn't come up with any reason why, if EPA could force the shutdown of all fossil fuel burning power plants, it could not also ban all burning of fossil fuels for airplanes, cars, industry, agriculture, home heat, etc. Of course they can. He said, quote, she flatly asserted there were standards without being able to specify any of them, what those standards were. So what are those standards? That's what we don't know. Experts are allowed to just be experts. I'm going to quote again here. This is Menton again. The best she came up with was notice and comment rulemaking, which is not a standard, but rather a procedure. I'll interrupt the quote here, end the quote here for a second. This is where the EPA solicits public comments. I've participated in some of these myself. I'll speak of in a moment. Where they solicit public comments in some period of time, 90 days, whatever it is, depending. And people file, well, anybody could. You could, I could, anybody can. A brief, as it were, a scientific brief on the merits and demerits of their proposals. Now, back to Menton's quote. It can be a time-consuming and burdensome procedure, this notice and comment rulemaking, and may generate thousands or even millions of comments. But at the end of that, the EPA can just go ahead and implement the rule it started with and plan to implement all along. When Professor Katzen says that, quote, EPA is not able to and does not do whatever it has a whim to do when it wakes up in the morning, she is just plain wrong. Now, Menton emphasized that in italics as well. He should have, because they can do damn well what they please, that they think they can get away with. Now, like I say, I've been party to some of these comments before. A friend of the blogs, a friend of ours, Jim Enstrom, he's very diligent about these. You can look him up. I have a link. He does them frequently. He often asks me and others to submit, particularly on PM 2.5, dust, some global warming things, and so forth. But I've done some, and I should do more, I know, but I've grown cynical about this process because, look, the EPA does indeed ask for these comments in their procedure, but they are absolutely free to ignore all the public comments they don't like. And you know what they do? They ignore them. The procedure is only that they ask for them, not that they obey or even consider them. Obeying would be an affront to their expertise and thus, impossible to countenance. Experts just can't do that. Now, about the Clean Air Act itself, Menton says, quote, what is certainly not there is any limiting principle or standard that constrains what EPA may do to effectively ban use of fossil fuel energy in all sectors once it's accepted that the EPA can regulate CO2 as a, quote, pollutant, end quote. Well, it's obvious they were up to no good. They were up to evil. doing this, either in complete ignorance, astonishing ignorance of, Science 101, which is maybe even believable if they're hiring diversity, inclusion, equity. I can believe maybe some of their diversity hires could be that stupid. But, they must have some old guard there who remember photosynthesis. So it means they were just willing to cheat and lie about calling CO2 a pollutant. Listen, declaring CO2 a pollutant is like declaring a man in a dress as a woman. Both have absolute equal scientific validity. But both, of course, are declared by experts as true. And they have the authority to do so. That's it for today, everybody. Happy trails.
Happy trails until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then.
Who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a song and think about sunny weather.
Happy trails to you till we meet again.